Hello, 7th graders, and welcome to lesson 8.1, which is on volume of cylinders. So we've already talked about your surface area of prisms as well as your surface area of cylinders. We also have talked about your surface area prisms. If you haven't watched those videos yet, please make sure that you go find those. And then we are moving on to your volume of your cylinders, okay? So one thing also to mention, I know it's new this week, please make sure you are watching out for that code word. I may do it right away, I may do it later on, okay? So your I can statements for this lesson are I can find the volume of cylinders, I can find the heights of cylinders giving the volumes, and I can solve real life problems. Something else to add to this is also a lesson that you're going to relearn again in 8th grade. I specifically even taught this to 8th graders this year because they go through a lot of other volume formulas. So they also talk about cylinders and spheres and cones and stuff like that. We're only going to focus on the prisms and the cylinders this year, but you will hear a lot more about this come next year in 8th grade. All right, so kind of our essential question, I've got a couple questions here that we're going to talk through. So one of the biggest things about doing your volume formula is being able to do the formula of the area of a circle. And I could see evident from a lot of people's quizzes that we're failing to remember which formula is what. Remember that your area formula is going to only be able to use the radius, okay? So your area formula for a circle is pi r squared, okay? So this is going to be important to know because as you saw earlier, this part is going to also kind of transcend into what is our volume formula, just like how the circumference of a circle became part of your surface area formula. Which is kind of why I just asked that. I went through that myself, but why is it important to know your area of a circle when solving problems involving cylinders? Because then why is it important about cylinders? Because what kind of bases do cylinders have? Cylinders have a circular base. So I actually have, in perfect fitting of distance learning, I have a box of Clorox wipes I'm kind of looking at up here. So I'm going to grab those and show you those. But I mean, it's a cylinder. A box of Clorox wipes is a cylinder. My bases are circles, okay, as you can see. So how can we find the volume of your cylinder? Well, if you remember from the other video when we were talking about volume of prisms, we were given a very basic formula of volume equals base times height, okay? The same thing can apply for this. You need to find the area of the base and multiply it by how tall it is. It's like you're adding a whole bunch of little circle discs as you go on and you want to know how much is there, okay? Remember, your volume is how much you can fill this up with. So if I'm going to continue to fill it up with Clorox wipes, or maybe I want to fill it up with soapy water because I'm going to clean something else or whatever, I want to know how much I can actually fit into a shape like this. So here again, you're seeing that very basic formula. We're actually going to rewrite this formula to be a little bit more fitting for our shape here, okay? So the volume V of a cylinder is the product of the area of the base and the height of the cylinder. So again, like I said, you're seeing that area of the base times the height. So to rewrite this, it was important to understand what's the area of your base. Well, what's the area of a circle, okay? We said the area of a circle is pi r squared. So all I'm going to do is rewrite this a little bit. Volume equals, and instead of putting base, I'm going to put that formula for the area of a circle, pi r squared. And then I'm going to multiply it by the height. So it's going to be pi r squared h. And that's all this is, okay? So the biggest part is understanding to find your radius. Make sure you're not throwing in diameter, okay? So we'll talk about what is your radius, what's your diameter. Make sure you're also plugging in your h. Now, I'll be specific here. Some of the questions, I'm not sure if they give us 3.14 or the 22 out of 7. So if there's no clear direction on what to do with pi, make sure you're just plugging in that 3.14 for pi. All right. All right, so here's our first example. First one says, find the volume of a cylinder. Round your answer to the nearest tenth. So here's my direction, find the volume of the cylinder. Something else to notice is that we're rounding our answer to the nearest tenth. Now, I think I had explained this a lot too when we were talking about surface area as well, but make sure that you don't round unless it specifically asks, okay? Because sometimes you want all those decimal places, but sometimes they'll be like, hey, round to the nearest hundredth, or, you know, round to the nearest tenth, round to the nearest whole number, okay? Sometimes I'll give you directions too if it doesn't seem to end, and I'll give you a little more clear directions. But this one wants to the tenth. So we're going to use that formula again, okay, which was volume equals pi r squared h. Now, looking at my shape here, I can tell that my height is this 6. And my 3, okay, the biggest thing to understand is this 3 a diameter or is this a radius? Probably thinking in your head what it is. This one is your radius. Remember, radius is always smaller, okay? It's only going to be from the center to the outside. Your diameter is when you're going to see it completely across the circle. Okay? So with that given information, I can start plugging things into my formula here. So I plug in my 3 into my radius, and I'm going to plug in the 6 into for my height, okay? From there, I'm not even going to plug in 3.14 for pi yet, okay? I am just going to solve this part first, and then I will plug in the 3.14, all right? So 3 squared is 9, so then I have 9 times 6. 9 times 6 gives me 54. I just moved it to the front of this pi because that's typically how mathematicians like to do that, is keep it any constant number in front of a variable to the front. Now, pi isn't exactly a variable. It acts like a variable sometimes in certain cases. We know that there is a number value for pi, so this is where I'm going to throw in that 3.14. So I'm going to take the 54 times 3.14. Okay, as you can see here, I kind of just flipped it again. It doesn't matter what order you're multiplying in, because multiplication, you can inverse or kind of flip the numbers with those properties and they will still work. Okay. So taking that 3.14 times 54, once I do that, I get an answer of 169.56. Now remember, my directions said round it to the nearest tenth. So that means I'm going to only look for the first decimal place, okay? So my first decimal place then would be here, but I'm going to round it. So I'm going to round this up. So then I get 169.6. Then I'm going to go back and I'm going to add in my units. So remember in last video we talked about adding your units. Units are very important. Okay, so make sure you're adding your units and you're adding the correct exponents that you need to, okay, if you need any. When you're doing these tests or quizzes, I will be docking you points if you aren't able to correctly identify what kind of unit this is. So we are measuring with meters here, and anytime it's a volume, volume is to the third, or as a lot of people say, is cubed. So I'm going to have 169.6 meters cubed. Okay. At any point, if you need to pause the video, go back, whatever, you can rewind this video, pause it if you need to, move on, okay? I'm going to keep going, though, with the next examples and next on your own. Okay? So next example. So now that we've kind of gotten used to using the volume formula, we're going to do it just a little bit differently this time. This time they want me to find the height of the cylinder, okay? And they want me to round my answer to the nearest whole number. So they specifically asked me not to have any decimal points, okay? Trickiest thing here is that I'm not just looking for volume. So it's not as easy as just being like, I'll plug it all in, multiply it all together, get my volume. I'm going to have to use my algebraic thinking to find my solution to this. So let's take it one step at a time, okay? They give us the volume right here. Here's my volume. They ask that I'm looking for the height, and then they give me another measurement here, okay? This 10 means it's going from all the way from here all the way down to here. So this 10 is actually telling me the diameter. So if I want to find my radius, remember your radius is going to be half of that, so my radius is going to end up being 5. Okay? From there, I can use the exact same formula. I'm going to start plugging things in. So I already wrote here that radius equals 5, which we just explained. I'm using the same formula. I'm just plugging in different numbers, okay? And I'm plugging them in where they belong. So I'm using volume equals pi r squared times h. We already was given the volume of 314. So for my volume part, I'm putting 314. Pi, for right now, we're just going to leave it as pi, okay? So pi is going to stay as the pi symbol. My radius is 5, so I'm going to have 5 squared times h, okay? I know it would look tempting to just multiply this all out, but I have to use my inverse operations to solve this algebraically. So my first step now is to simplify 5 squared. I don't want to just leave it as 5 squared. 5 squared is 25. And again, I just moved it up to the front just because that's kind of how we typically do it in math. From there then, this is where I'm going to really actually start looking at this pi, okay? So I'm going to take this pi, figure out that. So I'm plugging in 3.14 for pi. So now I have 25 times 3.14 times h is going to equal to 314. Once I figured that out, I took the 25 times 3.14, which gave me 78.5, and I'm still multiplying that by h, okay? And this side's still 314. Remember, when you have multiplication, your inverse operation and what to get rid and how to get rid of it and get that h alone is to use that opposite operation, which is division. So I went ahead and divided each side by that 78.5, which ends up canceling out this part, which is why I kind of drew a line through it. And then my answer is going to be just doing this division problem, 314 divided by 78.5. When I round it to the nearest whole number, because they asked me to round it to the nearest whole number, I get 4 inches. Now, I'm only talking about the height, so it's only going to be inches. I'm not talking about volume. I'm not talking about surface area. So again, these units, you need to be very mindful about what you are looking for, okay? Because if you put 4 squared here or 4 to the third, you're not getting it correct. You need to be very careful on your units, all right? I think the next part is going to be an on your own. So let's go double check. Yep. All right, so your next part is an on your own, okay? So I want you to find the volume or height h of the cylinder. Round your answer to the nearest tenth. So these are going to be looking exactly like those two examples we did. Problem number 1 is exactly like example number 1. Problem number 2 is exactly like example number 2. They just changed some of the numbers, okay? So go back in this video if you need to, or look at your notes and figure out how are you going to solve this problem, okay? So using that same formula, I will write it up here at the top. Volume equals pi r squared h, okay? Use that formula, find your volume, and in this case, find your height. When you get back, I will go through the answers. Okay, so again, pause the video, take some time to answer these problems. Alrighty, welcome back. You should have gotten the answer for both of these problems, so I'm going to show you my work and explain through how I solved these. So for your first one, it's very straightforward. You're just going to throw your radius and your height into this formula. So my radius is 4. I'm given a radius, not a diameter. My height is 15. So I first did the 4 times the 4, which is 16, and I multiplied it by 15. So I just left out the one step of figuring out that this is 16. When I multiply that, it's 240. And then I'm just going to multiply it by the pi, so 3.14. And that's how I get 753.6. Make sure your units are feet cubed because you're talking about your volume. Okay. Problem number 2 here then was a lot like example number 2. I'm throwing it into the formula, and this time I'm looking for the height. So I'm plugging in the volume 176. Multiplying it by the radius. You were given a diameter again, so you had to cut it in half or divide it by 2 to get the radius, which is 4. Okay, so I just took 4 squared times pi already, which is 50.24. Use my inverse operations to solve for the rest of this problem with my h. Divide these out, and my final answer then is 3.5 centimeters. Okay, again, it was rounding to the nearest tenth, so that's why I'm only looking for the first decimal place. And in this case, your units are not going to be squared or cubed. They're just going to stay this way. Okay, I'm running out of the time for this video. Please check in on video 2 here. Please make sure you're still looking for your code word as we go along. I will see